Good morning, friends. I just wanted to talk about buttons a little bit today. Um, so I've seen some people asking for kind of fancy buttons on the different boards. So first I wanted to talk about things that you can do to make your standard Elementor button a little bit fancier. So to add this, I just went over to the toolbox and dragged a button over. So this is my standard Elementor button. So we're going to edit it a little bit so you can see some of the things that you can do with it. When I click on the edit button, the toolbar opens up over on the left hand side. So some of the things you can do is you can add a border if you want. And we're going to need to tell, so when you're adding a border, you need to add the border, and there's a bunch of different kinds you can play around with. We're just going to use the standard solid border. But then what you have to do is tell the border how wide to be. So now you can see that there's color around my border. And keep in mind that every single button option has a normal and a hover state. So we might want to say, okay, when we're hovering, the border should be green instead of the standard color. So now when we hover over, we can see the border is green, but you can't really see it because the background's green. So we'll change that border to yellow. So now when you hover, we get a green button with the yellow border. And when we're normal, we have my standard button and border color. The other thing we can do just right out of the box with Elementor that's really cool is we can set a border radius. So this is what makes the border edges curve. And all we have to do that is start clicking here, and you can see the border's getting curvier and curvier. And if you keep going, you end up with this kind of oval shape. So that's one option. The other things you can do with a button that I think are pretty cool, I'm going to get rid of the radius here. Just go back to a plain square button with the border. If you go over here to advanced, you can make the button move a little bit. So you can add a motion effect. So if we add this, the button, when it loads onto the page, you can tell it to, show up in different ways. So the best way to do this is just to play around with some different options. The other thing you can do is you can tell the border that when you hover over it, you want it to move. So you might want the button to rotate a little bit when you hover. So watch what happens. Woo! Those are just some things that you might use on a landing page to get attention. So now we have this border, this button like changing and rotating and doing crazy things. And I'm just gonna, if you apply an effect and then you don't like it, you just have to click this back to default. So now we can see the button should go back to default. We might have to update it so it knows to take that off. So the other thing I've seen people asking for is buttons that you really can't create using CSS or using the standard button controls. So one of the buttons I saw was somebody wanted a button with really sharp angles on the corners. So one way to do that, the simplest way, is just to create a graphic for that button. And like, here's my graphic I made and drop that in. So this isn't officially a button, but we can make it behave like a button. So to make this image behave like a button, we can add a link to it. So we'll just say this button should go to our contact page. So we'll go down here. I just have it. Okay, so now when we click this button, it's going to go to the contact page. But what if we want this button to be a little bit more lively? So we want it to move and do some of the other more button-like behaviors. What you can do is you can set the opacity to be different. So we're going to say, okay, now watch what happens when I mouse over it. You see how it gets that kind of a lighter effect? So that's one way to make it look more like a button. The other thing you can do is you can apply all those fun motion effects that we apply to our normal button. So, we can tell it to rotate. We're going to do the rotate again. Oh, but you see what the mistake I made? It needs to be on hover. So we're going to just take that back, go here and say, hey, rotate just a smidge when we hover over you. See how that's like going opaque? So it's really obvious to somebody that that is a button, even though it is a graphic. Then the next iteration is somebody who has a lot of buttons and they do not want to have to put the text on each button. So they just want a standard button shape, and then they want to be able to add text on the fly. So the way to do that is to make your button, button shape, and then add it as the background to a flexbox container. So to do that, we're going to jump over here to Style, grab an image. So this is the button I made that doesn't have the words on it. So there we have our button with no words. So we do need words. And how we would add those is we would go over here. Oh, and one thing, because I set this up before, so I want to point out this button, after we add it, we want to center it in the Flexbox container. And we want to set it to no repeat, because look what happens if I say repeat. Oh, that's not what we want for sure. We want it to look like a button. So we set it to no repeat. And then the size, we want it to be contained within the Flexbox container. So if you do auto, do you see how that like spread out, or cover, see how big it gets? We just want it to, be contained in the box. That means the button is going to make itself fit in that space. Then to add the text, what you'll do is you will drag a heading over to this container. And you'll notice that I have the settings for this container. My layout set to be centered. So that will keep the text where you want it to be. And sometimes you have to play around with this a little bit, but it does make it easy. Once you get it set up, you can just copy and paste that container where you need it to be, or set it as a global. And then just all you have to do then is change the text each time. So we're going to change this text to say, click here. We will center it and then style it a little bit. So I want to use my Trajan font that I enjoy and make it a little bigger, maybe not that big. And I want this button to be black text. So now we have a button that looks a lot like the text button, except this text on here is dynamic. So the other thing this button needs to do is go somewhere. So we'll jump back here to the container and tell the container that we need a link. Oh no, sorry, we don't want to tell the container that. We're going to tell the header that. That's how I solved that problem. So we want the header to have the link. So we're going to have that header link to contact us. Oops. So grab that, and now we're gonna look at this on mobile, because we want to make sure that everything stays lined up in that container when we switch to our phone view. So we'll do that. You can see that that button stays pretty consistent on the mobile platforms. So those are 3 ways to do fancy buttons. And obviously you could take that button shape and make anything you want. It could be an arrow, it could be shaped like a rainbow. It just makes sure styling options for buttons almost limitless. And really, this is the old school way of doing buttons, so it's not that revolutionary, but when people get used to using the button widget, they forget there's other ways to hack these buttons and get the look that you're really going for. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to my channel and let me know if you have any other questions. I love solving problems, and I would be happy to try to figure out how to help you get the look that you're looking for your website. Thank you.